agenda for today, allow me to also elaborate a little bit about the theme that we are going to have the discussion, which is about data protection as human security. So basically, as we know that one of the SDGs, especially the SDGs 16, is about how we build a society, especially amidst the public health crisis that has been going on for the last almost 3 years now, has grown to become a global threat to human security, especially when it comes to the data protection. So therefore, today, along together with all the speakers, we would like to discuss together some of the key questions in regards to that issue. Like, for example, how do data-intensive regulations shrink the civic space and affect human rights protection, such as the right to privacy? And also about the issue of the inclusion, exclusion, as well as the discrimination against the vulnerable groups in regards to their data protection, as well as the issue of misinformation, about hoax, about digital literacy that affect people's life in the post-pandemic era. And not to forget about the key lessons, as well as the strategies to promote a better data protection in supporting the achievement of SDG 16. And to be able to discuss about those key questions, we are going to have some of the honorable speakers that already present today with us. But allow me to also then go through the agenda for today, which will be started with the welcoming remarks from the Director of Nuffic Neso Indonesia, Mr. Peter Van Tel, followed by the opening speech from the Honorable Dean Faculty of Law from Unika Atmajaya, Jakarta, Indonesia, Dr. Asmin Francisca, SHLLM. And then followed by the keynote speech from the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology Indonesia, which will be represented by Mr. Teguh Arifyadi SHMHC EHCHFI. And then the next agenda, which will be, of course, the core of the discussion today, there will be 3 presentations. The first will be presented by Mr. Tervel Bobers. He is a data protection enthusiast from Utrecht, the Netherlands. And then followed by the second presentation by Professor Dr. Ida Bagus Supancana, SHMH. And then lastly, we're also going to have a presentation from Dr. Sih Yuliana Wahyuning Tias, SHM. And then afterwards, we're going to have 30 minutes of question and answer session. So during all of the presentations, all of the audience are invited to already start to write down any questions or remarks in the chat box. And then along with the proposal to which speaker that the question is addressed. So without further ado, I think we will already start today's agenda with the opening or welcoming remarks from Mr. Peter Van Tel as the Director of Nuffic Neso Indonesia. But to remind you again, we are also thankful to be able to have this event as a result of cooperation or collaboration between Nuffic Neso Indonesia, Unika Atmajaya Jakarta, and of course, Halo Indonesia. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, my name is Peter Van Tel. I'm the Director of Nuffic here in Jakarta. I'm happy to welcome you on this important and no doubt interesting seminar, Orange Talk 9, which will focus on data protection. I am old enough to remember a time that we had no mobile phones and that we had no computer. And calling from the Netherlands, my home country, to Indonesia was prohibitively expensive, I can tell you. You were planning such a call. Nowadays, you just pick up your mobile phone and you call WhatsApp, you call FaceTime, and it costs you nothing. It is just one example of how deeply the technological developments are penetrating in our lives. We all spend hours on our mobile phone and hours on our computer. We work, we share information, we share data, we share many aspects of our private life online. And those data need to be protected because there are many positive aspects to the technological developments. They open up opportunities, they make communication easier and cheaper, but there are also risks. There is bullying going on online, there is theft going on online. That also happens in the education sector. Several universities in Indonesia, also in the Netherlands, have been subject of cybercrime, for example. So there's good reason why the authorities, the government, has to protect data. And Indonesia also has just accepted a new law on cybersecurity and data protection. And it will be interesting and important to see how that law is being implemented. So I'm very grateful to Atmajaya University, to Halo, and also to Cominfo to work with us to put this event together, because it is about a truly important issue. And I'm looking forward to hear the discussions. I'm happy to see some old friends, Professor Supancana, of course, who we all consider to be among our senior, but also Ibu Asmin, Ibu Julia from Atmajaya, which is an important partner for Nuffic NASO, and also Pa Pangrepan from Cominfo. Thank you very much for your contribution today. Finally, I also want to mention for this audience that in the next week of Indonesia-Netherlands Education and Research, from 18 to 20 October, there will be a session on digitalization, science and academic freedom. And I mentioned it here because some of you may be interested, because we will discuss similar sort of issues, but specifically focused on the education sector. How we deal with the pros and cons of digitalization, the advantages and the disadvantages of the new technologies, and we will have interesting speakers, including Ibu Paulina Panen from Universitas Terbuka, Pa Herlambang from UGM, and also two speakers from the Netherlands. So if you're interested, then sign up for Winner and join us also during that seminar. It shows how important this issue is. So I wish you fruitful discussions today and looking forward to continue our collaboration on this important issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was the welcoming remarks from Mr. Peter Van Tal as the director of Nuffic NASO Indonesia. Of course, again, we would like to remind you that this event would not be able to be hosted without the very nice collaboration between the Nuffic NASO Indonesia, Unika Atmajaya Jakarta, and Halo Indonesia. Before we continue to the next opening speech, we would like to remind all the audience to kindly fill in the privacy consent form that is already provided, the link within the chat box. Please kindly remember to fill in completely and then sign for the privacy consent. Of course, not to mention that this event itself is about the data protection. So without further ado, we're going to walk further to the next opening speech, which will be delivered by the Honorable Dean, Faculty of Law from Unika Atmajaya Jakarta, Dr. Asmin Francisca, SH, LLM. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Ibu Meta. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for everyone who coming, and thank you so much for this collaborative work that have been conducted by Nuffic NASO Indonesia, Halo, and also the Faculty of Law at Atmajaya Catholic University of Indonesia. The Orange Talk, the 9th Orange Talk is, I think, it's very timely. The issue is about the data protections as a human security, and also not only because this is we have the new law, but also we know this issue really important to all of us. As Pak Peter have been said, Indonesia has a law on data protections, and which become one of the crucial and also important topics that have to be discussed by among us, not only the academics, but also the policymakers, officials, governments, and also the students. And we know that our data is very important and need to be protected. Of course, it's not only about the law itself, but it's a part of our as a citizens in Indonesia. We hope our long run cooperations between Nuffic Neso Indonesia, Atmajaya Catholic University, and also Hello will come up with the many ideas, many new concepts, and also many contributions to the policymakers, and also give the policy implementation and law become much better. Looking forward to the discussions. Let's contribute to the policy and also law implementations regarding these issues. We know that there are many pros and cons, there are many negative and positive impact on this law, but we do, as academics, we will give and deliver the good insight regarding this issue to be able to promote and also protect our citizens' rights. So without further ado, I really thank you for Pak Peter as the director Nuffic Neso Indonesia. Thank you, Pak, again and again working with us. And Bapak Teguh from Director Pengendalian Aplikasi Informatika Kementerian Komunikasi dan Informatika, Mr. Travel Bober from Data Protections Enthusiasts Utrecht, the Netherlands. Of course, our love and very lovable lecturers and professor, Professor Ida Bagus Supancana dan Ibu Yuli for contribute to these events. We looking forward with the discussions and let's give our best to this meeting and also to these online discussions. Thank you so much. I turn back to you, Ibu Meta.
Thank you so much, Ibu Dr. Asmin Francisca, for the wonderful shift, but very fruitful speech that indeed this event is going on or coming at the very perfect timing, yeah, because we just heard, of course, we just know that our House of Representatives or our DPR has just legalize the new law or regulation under the data protection, and of course it's always been relevant to discuss, although it's already been legalized, but nevertheless we as the citizens have the right and interest to always relevantly discuss about the future of the data protection. And so in regards to that, without a further ado, I will also introduce audience to three of our honorable speakers today that are already presenting among us. So the first presentation will be from Mr. Tervel Bober. He's a data protection enthusiast from Utrecht, the Netherlands. And he will be delivering a presentation about the introduction to EU or European Union data protection. It's about the GDPR and beyond. Mr. Tervel Bober itself, he achieved his BA with honors cum laude from University College Utrecht, the Netherlands, major in law and economics. And later on, he also received his LLM degree in Information and Communication Technology Law from University of Oslo, Norway. So without further ado, Mr. Tervel Bober, the stage is yours. And I would like to also remind all of the, I'm sorry, I think My mistake that before we have the presentation from Mr. Tersel Bobel, we would like to also welcome Bapak Teguh Arifiadi SHMH as the representative from the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology from Indonesian government to give the keynote speech, and then afterwards followed by the presentation. Mr. Teguh Arifiadi SHMH, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Meta, and thank you for all participants. Good afternoon, here from Jakarta. Yeah, I'm here on behalf of Director General of Informatic Application, Ministry of Communication and Informatics, Indonesia, Mr. Samuel Pangerapan. Yeah, I would like to extend the warmest welcome to Mr. Peter as Director of Nuffic Indonesia, and Dr. Asmin Francisca as a Dean, Faculty of Law, Unikat Majaya, and of course from Hello, yeah, CEO Hello, Mas Lulu, and all the panelists. Thank you for coming and joining with us, and all the participants who attended virtually today. I'm here pleased and honored to attend today Orange Talk Series named Data Protection as Human Security and Datafied Practices Post-Pandemic Society. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, during this COVID-19 crisis, yeah, technology, especially information and communication technologies, played a crucial role in supporting the health and safety of individuals. It also keeps economics and society going in the face of uncertainty by transforming the traditional market into the one that make considerable of use of technology to ease the exchange of goods and service. As a result, the COVID-19 issue has altered several aspects of daily life and made the use of technology as a cultural norm. We here on the government side, the COVID-19 issue compels government to take the technology as a short-term response to the situation. It forced many governments to accelerate technology implementation to provide citizens with public services, of course, with the good services from us. In addition, technology-enabled government makes swift policy choice based on real-time data and analytics to improve local authorities, coordination capabilities, and provide evidence-based service to those who require them the most. It indicates that technology has played a crucial role in defining policies. However, we are aware characteristic, making it not quite natural in relation to human civilization. We have a seen example of both beneficial and harmful societal effects of the technology throughout the history, such as the adoption of surveillance against their citizens in an effort to prevent the spread of the virus. The long-standing myths are that we must safety and data analytics. Despite this, the post-pandemic crisis has broadened the traditional concept of security, that is from state security to human-centered perspective. After the COVID-19 crisis, an attempt to build digital government initiatives should concentrate on enhancing personal data protection and digital inclusion regulation. Consequently, the exposure of human to technological innovation must be understood and discussed within the context of sustainable goals while incorporating privacy, personal data protection, and of course, cybersecurity into the design process. Thus, the conversation surrounding privacy, especially personal data protection and cybersecurity, must act as a tool for harmonizing the SDGs, or as the success of Sustainable Development Goal relies on the technology beneficial role. Specifically, the important goals related to the subject are outlined in SDG 16, which promote peaceful and inclusive societies by implementing non-discriminatory laws and policies for sustainable development. Subsequently, the prevalence of laws and regulation creates a sense of security in the society that might impress trust. Ladies and gentlemen, in the effort to increase public trust and provide guarantees for the fulfillment of human rights, the government, through Ministry of Communication and Informatics, initiated the formulation of Indonesia Data Protection Law, which was approved by the House of Representatives or Parliament last September. The Indonesian Data Protection Laws aims to empower people with confidence to disclose their personal data without fears of abuse or violation of their rights. This approach will therefore establish a balance between the right of individuals and groups whose interests are represented by the state. Thus, with these well-balanced policies, it will be possible to us to develop policies that safeguard humanity, improve economic growth, and consider the common good. The balanced aspect of Indonesia Data Protection Law is reflected in the right of the personal data subject, such as the right to obtain information, the right of access, and the right to stop the processing of personal data, as well as the obligation for personal data controllers to respect these rights. Moreover, the processing personal data must be adequate, relevant, keep up to date, limited to what is needed, and written for no longer than necessary. In addition, personal data controllers are obligated to implement limited, specific, and transparent measures to protect individuals in relation to the processing of their personal data. Ladies and gentlemen, ultimately, the Indonesian Data Protection Law empowers organizations to commit the protection of personal data, contributing to SDG 16 and fostering a culture of security and a sense of safety in society. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for all the participants who attended today and all the panelists. Thank you. Hopefully, this webinar can be a valuable opportunity to increase an understanding of the personal data protection law in achieving the sustainable development goals and human rights protection as well. May God bless us with our good health to make this event successful and enjoyable. Thank you. I return back to Ibu Meta, please.
Thank you very much, Bapak Teguh from the Kemkominfo, or the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology Indonesia, which has delivered such a virtual keynote speech as to introduce more specifically the topic of the discussion for today, which of course is strongly relevant. Not only that, we know that last month we already have our parliament legalized the new law on data protection, but also with so many ongoing issues that has been quite a noise among our society, also on the grassroots level, not only about the infamous Biorka issue, but also we also heard about many of the cases that are reported by our citizens about the fraud, about the embezzlement, that also about the theft, that basically all together come up as a new phenomenon of the cyber crime that seems to be strongly relevant indeed about indeed to the regards of the new data protection law. So today we're also going to hopefully have a fruitful discussion about how to then strategize the implementation of this new law and regulation that really can tap into or handle the ongoing issues on the grassroots level. So not only to become such a very nice and thorough law, but more importantly, how the implementation would actually be done by not only the executive or represented by the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology in Indonesia, but also that must come as a collaboration or cooperation among the non-government society or organization, as well as the academia communities. So I think this event is deliberately becoming such a nice event then for all of us to talk about. And in regards to that, we would also like to probably learn from the other region of the world, which is the European Union, about how the EU managed the data protection through the infamous GDPR regulation, which in shortly will be presented by Mr. Tervel Bobo with the title of the presentation about the introduction to the EU data protection, the GDPR and beyond. So without a further ado, I would like to kindly serve the stage to Mr. Tervel Bobo. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Meta. I will put my presentation on the screen shortly, but as I begin, just heartfelt congratulations for the ratification of Indonesia's Data Protection Act. It's a very exciting development and always gladdening to see. But I am here today to conduct something of an introduction, which will be more of a crash course due to the breadth of the topic at hand, to EU data protection. Now, of course, the centerpiece of this presentation will be the GDPR, since it represents the linchpin, the great spearhead of the EU's first data agenda. But since then, in the last 5 years, there has been quite the explosive growth in legislation in the data protection sector, as well as intersecting sectors in European Union law. So they certainly deserve a mention in our attention at the beginning of the presentation. We will have to be hasty to get through as much as possible, but I think we can do it. So to start off, as I mentioned, the centerpiece here is indeed the General Data Protection Regulation, also known as the GDPR. It deals with personal data protection, which we will define shortly, and it's targeted towards natural persons, so not companies and not legal entities. However, it is only a big fish in a very big sea. It has several complements, including the e-privacy directive, which is lex specialis dating from back to the GDPR's predecessor. And it seeks to clarify certain specific areas of privacy and electronic communications. It's mostly known for its provisions on cookies and such, and it applies to both natural and legal persons. It is also supposed to be renewed and turned into a regulation. However, that is facing significant disagreements in the legislative process, so it has been postponed for quite a while now. Other laws include the Law Enforcement Directive, which is also lex specialis, and as implied from its name, it complements the GDPR in the areas of public security, criminal matters, and such that are presided by public bodies. Of course, the other acts that need to be mentioned are much newer. They include the Data Governance Act, which has just recently come into force. The Data Governance Act is part of the European Union's second stage of the digital agenda, which aims to foster data sharing and trust in the data spaces. It is largely focused on data governance, but intersects with data protection because it seeks to engender trust by the creation of voluntary data altruism schemes, requirements on data marketplaces, which serve as intermediaries for the share of data, and it lays down rules on public bodies that make data available for use by private bodies as well. It does not include obligations towards public bodies. It does not introduce substantive rights. However, it is an important framework instead. Now, what does introduce substantive rights is the upcoming Data Act. The Data Act is indeed sort of a follow-up on the GDPR. It introduces new substantive rights, obligations, requirements on international data transfers, and so on. And it has its own very specific provisions, which sometimes seem likely to cause headaches for GDPR lawyers, since several of them are either parallel but not quite synonymous and harmonized with GDPR definitions, or are outright require further refinement, shall we say. But beyond the Data Act itself, there is also the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a very relevant piece of legislature, especially to today's topic in this talk, since it is tasked with curbing the threat posed by reckless deployment of powerful AI algorithms that could easily result in manipulations, algorithmic discrimination, and more. Among its provisions, it classifies AI technologies into several categories, including unacceptable, which includes things like subliminal manipulations, credit score systems, social credit score systems, and so on. Then high risk, low risk, and no risk. Now, of course, there are more upcoming. As I mentioned, the privacy regulation is poised to eventually substitute the privacy directive. There are legislations related to the Digital Services Acts, Digital Markets Acts, and also what we will soon be seeing in Europe as a major point are what is known as sectoral data spaces and their accompanying legislations. Data spaces are defined as thematic areas with shared tailored governance mechanisms. So for example, there will be a health data space, which is currently in the process of legislation. And they come as a consequence of the general laws already being laid down through the GDPR, the Data Act, and the Data Governance Act. Of course, we will not have time to go through most of these, and instead we shall focus on the GDPR as the emblematic and foundational cornerstone of EU data protection. Now, quick background, personal data in general. Personal data under the GDPR is defined as any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person. It is not, as sometimes understood, a synonym for privacy. Privacy is a close parallel that is frequently involved, but personal data protection is far beyond the scope of private life. Indeed, personal data protection is a fundamental right in the European Union that is enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. It is inherent to every citizen and even permanent resident in the European Union, and rather inalienable. So the GDPR at its base is quite large, 261 pages, and a very long legislative process leading up to it. It is focused on principles and rights of natural persons, and it does not legislate on specific technologies like, say, the AI Act does. The GDPR never says this technology is regulated in this matter. Instead, it lays out principles and lets competent authorities decide how these principles apply on a national basis, and it hopes that these authorities can harmonize their rulings between each other through their interactions. In terms of its scope, of course, these are not the full legal terms here, but they are the ones most relevant. The material scope relates chiefly to the processing of personal data wholly or partly by automated means. Its territorial scope once again, just the most relevant parts of it, concerns establishments of controllers or processors, which are terms we will define shortly, within the union, or where, the activities of controllers or processors outside of the union, where their activities either relate to offering goods or services to people in the union, thereby targeting them, or monitoring their behavior within the union. So one thing to note here is the GDPR is quite extraterritorial thanks to the second provision I mentioned. Now, in terms of some more fundamentals, as we already mentioned, personal data is any information relating to identified or identifiable natural persons. This is a four-component definition, and it's very wide. It is rather risk-based in being analyzed by the courts in practice, which means that the courts don't look so much at whether a contractual agreement says something is personal data or not. They look at whether it is de facto likely to be linked to a person, possible to mine for identifiability through technological means, and so on and so forth. Processing under the GDPR is extremely broadly defined. It's any operation or set of operations performed on personal data. This includes everything one could think of, including collection, storage, retrieval, structuring, making available by dissemination, transmission, and so on and so forth. Almost everything is processing, if not everything. Actors under the GDPR include the controller, which is the entity that determines the means and purposes of data processing. The processor is the entity which performs the technical processing on behalf of the controller. It is, of course, possible for an entity to be a controller and a processor, but frequently the technological processing is outsourced to another company, shall we say. And of course, there is a very active problem where there is an arrangement known as joint controllership, where through common or converging decisions, two separate entities end up determining the purposes and means of data processing simultaneously, and thereby sharing controllership responsibility. That is frequently the source of many headaches. And finally, as actors under the GDPR scheme, we have the data protection authorities, which are the independent public authorities who are responsible for monitoring the GDPR's application, advising private bodies, reporting on the GDPR's implementation, and so on. With the basic principles of the GDPR, we have several, starting from the lawfulness, fairness, and transparency of processing. All processing must be subject to an appropriate legal basis. We will list those later. And it must clearly convey to data subjects that their data is being processed. Further, under the principle of purpose limitation, it can only be done under delimited and previously established purposes. It cannot be ambiguous, unlimited in scope, or too general. And it must also be proportional in terms of pursuing legitimate purposes. Proportionality is a defined term in EU law on its own. Processing must also respect data minimization, which means it must limit itself only to what is necessary in terms of quantity and quality, and it must only happen when the purposes behind processing are not fulfillable by any other means. Then the GDPR demands accuracy, which means that data must be kept up to date and kept accurate. Inaccurate data must be rectified or erased. For the principle of storage limitation, it is dictated that data must be stored only for as long as necessary, which for most controllers seem to be a couple of years, though that is certainly very contextual. Integrity and confidentiality dictate that it must be protected against unlawful processing, against accidental loss, destruction, or damage. So it must be kept well guarded. And finally, accountability means that the controller must not just ensure compliance, but be able to show before the competent public authority that they are compliant. They must keep proper logs and be able to show their methods and processes that lead them to GDPR compliance. So the burden is on the controller to demonstrate that they are respecting the GDPR rather than on the public authority to investigate their compliance. Now, as we mentioned, lawfulness dictates that there must be a proper legal basis for any processing operation. These include, there are 6 legal bases possible. The first is contractual or pre-contractual necessity, when whatever is being agreed upon is impossible to fulfill without data processing. Say, for example, delivering something to an address following online purchase, it requires a seller to process the address. Then there is the legal basis for legal obligation of controller, mostly related to stuff such as financial reporting and similar obligations. Then we have vital interests, where somebody's life is in danger and there is no better way to save it than to process their data. Public interest or official authority means that some enterprise has been legally, through a legislative act, vested with official authority that allows it to process this data. And legitimate interests is also a possible legal basis, though a very tricky one, because it means that a business's legitimate interest in pursuing economic activity is weighed against the degree to which a data subject's right to data protection is curtailed. Very frequently, that balancing act will not be in favor of the business when it comes to profiling and behavioral tracking. Finally, we have the legal basis of consent. It is, of course, possible to process data if the data subject himself agrees to it. However, that comes with many conditionalities. Consent must be obtained intelligibly, clearly using plain language. Data subject must always be able to withdraw consent, and there can be no coercion, threatening, bundling of consent with the performance of a contract, and so on. Consent is furthermore specific to a specific data processing operation. Consent must be informed as to who the controller is, what purposes they pursue, what data they process, and so on and so forth. And it must be unambiguous, no pre-checked boxes, but rather an active affirmation. Now, there are further special categories of personal data that are protected above and beyond the regulars. And they include racial, political, religious, and biometric data, among others. These special categories are afforded protection that make them so that they can only be processed under very specific conditions. Usually that is when either there is explicit consent for the specified purposes of processing, or when the data subject themselves end up making this data manifestly public by publishing it themselves already. But in all cases, there are extra safeguards necessitated. Now, data subjects are also given substantive rights under the GDPR. They have the right to be provided concise, transparent information by the controller. They have the right to receive this information in a timely manner, usually within a month. And the information must be free of charge unless, in some exceptions, the data subject is abusing this right, in which case they can be charged for it if they ask it for the 50th time in a month. For example, not actually the 50th time. There's no legal base for that. Anyway, the information must further be received by the data subject. This information is very, very broad. I cannot list it, but this slide just goes to illustrate that the data subject has to receive an extensive amount of this information. Otherwise, their rights have been violated. The data subject has a right of access. They can access information on whether their own information that is being processed, and they can request confirmation on whether processing is taking place in the first instance. They also have the right to rectification. If the data relating to them is inaccurate, it has to be corrected or completed. They have the right to erasure, which is popularly called the right to be forgotten. The right to have their data erased if it is no longer necessary, if they withdraw their consent, and consent is the basis for processing, and so on and so forth. They also have the right to restriction of processing, where all processing besides storage is suspended. And they have furthermore the right to object to processing, which is very similar to restriction. However, it is invoked in specific cases of legal processing under the basis of legitimate interest, public interest, and so forth. Finally, they have the right to data portability, which means they can request their data in a structured format, which they may provide or keep for their own purposes. And data subjects may also have the right to not be subject to automated decision-making. This is to prevent algorithmic bias and oppression from seeping through, and it gives data subjects the right to always request human supervision, intervention, and so forth to any decisions. Now, this was the substantive part. We go into more administrative responsibilities now for controllers. Controllers must demonstrate compliance with the GDPR. They must ensure that their data operations are protected by design and by default through various technical means. They must also designate representatives in the EU if they are captured by the GDPR's extraterritorial scope. And they must also maintain records of most of their information. Furthermore, controllers must cooperate with supervisory authorities upon request. They must ensure security that is proportional to the nature of their processing operations. The more sensitive data being handled, the greater security they must ensure. They must furthermore communicate personal breaches to both supervisory authorities and, if it is severely impactful to them, to data subjects as well that have been affected by breaches. And where necessary, they must designate a data protection officer. That, where necessary, means when they are of the relevant size and they deal with certain categories and types of data processing. Furthermore, data controllers must conduct impact assessments whenever they are engaging in risky processing that may infringe on certain rights. They must confer with their DPOs on relevant questions. They must review the processing in light of the findings of their impact assessments whenever something changes in the risks that their data processing engenders. And they must further consult with supervisory authorities whenever they plan to pull off a high-risk data processing operation. Almost at the end now, data protection officers are tasked with their own set of responsibilities. They advise actors of their obligations under the GDPR. They monitor GDPR and other data protection law compliance. They supervise impact assessments. They are the cooperating point, the touching point between a company and a supervisory authority. And furthermore, they are simply left to, they are the general communication point. That's the best way to put it. International data transfers are also regulated by the GDPR. Usually the go-to default is the existence of an adequacy decision that allows international data transfers on the basis that the European Commission has determined that some country or organization has adequate protections. Failing an adequacy decision, there are a wide variety of alternative arrangements. And very lastly, as a slide, there are some usually seen difficulties in GDPR compliance. Interpreting its broad provisions is difficult and is frequently the reason why people should look to their DPOs for guidance. It is sometimes very difficult to distinguish controller and processor relationships and put them into neat categories, and especially with the case of joint controllership. International data transfers are frequently made very difficult because what is a sufficient safeguard is highly arguable, and this has been at the base of landmark cases such as the Schrems decisions that regulate EU-US arrangements. There are technical hurdles where old IT So I was just saying that there are technical hurdles. And finally, there are large investments needed to stay GDPR compliant and to securing and providing information to data subjects. And that was our very quick crash course on the GDPR and European data protection law. Thank you for bearing with me. It was quite a lot to get through.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tervel Bobev. Of course, that's indeed such a very introduction to GDPR in a very nutshell. Nevertheless, it's such a compact and thorough crash course for us to be able to understand in a very short moment about what GDPR is for the European Union. In such a detailed explanation of the short version of GDPR introduction, what I may have the remarks in regards to our Indonesian data protection law. There are at least 3 points that may also be worth to be discussed later. The first is the complexity of data protection law, that I just realized how complex it should be because of the technology itself. So imagine if the technology is that advanced, meaning that the data protection law and regulation should also be even more in advance. So meaning that our legislative, executive, and judicative institutions have to be hand in hand, work together with all parts of the society in order to always keep updated the law and regulation as well as the implementation, which is of course not an easy homework for us. And then the second point that I also have the remark on is that the fact that data protection law is probably one of the type of law and regulation that involves so many actors. At least there are 4 actors that you already mentioned on your presentation. Because of the multi aspects of the human's life that are tapped into or that are involved in the umbrella of the data protection in law, not only about the citizens' government data, but also even on the private economic sectors, as well as even the AI, the future of AI technology that we have yet aware of it. At least I think most of Indonesians have yet aware of it. And then the third remarks that I could also conclude from your presentation in regards to what Indonesian has is that the fact that it is a big homework for us to then have a thorough education and awareness program for all of our society, because then even the terms of privacy, the terms of consent itself is still very foreign. It's still very novel concept for Indonesian citizens. So imagine people who live in the remote areas, and then if they see the Google map cars going around their village with the surveillance camera, I imagine maybe they're not even aware that their data has been taken without their consent. So I think there are many layers of topics in regards to the very novel law and regulation on data protection within Indonesia, not only for the government, but also even for the for the public sectors or the grassroots, on the grassroots level as well. So then to elaborate further about that discussion, we would like to also invite the second speaker that will be presented by the distinguished Professor Dr. Ida Bagus Supancana, SH, MH, that will be delivering a presentation titled on the data protection, human security, and the SDGs achievement in the post-pandemic era, balancing privacy, rights, and the public interest. Professor Ida Bagus Rahmadi Supancana achieved his doctoral degree in international law from Leiden University in 1998. So he's much more senior than me, obviously. And he's currently affiliated as a professor of law at Catholic University of Atmajaya, as well as the coordinator at Atmajaya Studies on Aviation, Outer Space, and Cyber Laws. Such a very interesting topic indeed. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Ida Bagus Rahmadi Supancana. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction to Ibu Meta. Good morning in Amsterdam, yeah? And also good morning for Mr. Tervel, probably somewhere in Bulgaria. And good afternoon, participants of this webinar. Actually, it is not easy for me to make a good response on the questions raised in the TOR. It's really a very good questions and very difficult questions, since it is not only dealing with the data protection, but also dealing with the human security, SDG, achievement, etc. On this topic, as mentioned by the moderator, I will use this simple systematic, starting with the introduction and some basic concept and data protection and SDGs achievement, digitalization of health system and personal data protection, and also some issues of misinformation, but I would also prefer to use the word fake news because it is broader than misinformation, because there are also some disinformation and the digital literacy, and some lesson learned and strategies to promote better data protection in supporting the achievement of the SDGs. Yeah. Next slide, please. On the introduction, as we know that the post-pandemic era create new normality, both in working arrangement, the right of employee to disconnect, and of course, on the privacy challenges. And there are some issues that need to be analyzed in relation to personal data protection, such as data protection and SDGs achievement, digitalization of health system, fake news and digital literacy, and some lesson learned and strategies to promote better data protection. To address the above issues, of course, we need to balance between privacy rights as a part of the human rights and also with the public interest. Next slide. Now we start with some basic concept. Yeah. When we are talking about data protection, we need to talk about privacy and human rights, and what are the scope of privacy, the scope of human security, sustainable development goals, and of course the new normal in the post-pandemic era. We start with the privacy and human rights. Next slide. There are several international instruments, both in the form of hard laws as well as soft laws, dealing with the privacy and human rights issues, such as Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 9 of the Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights, the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, and also the Arab Charter of Human Rights of 2004. There are only some among many international instruments dealing with privacy and human rights. In principle, privacy as part of human right must be respected. Next slide. When we are talking about the privacy, privacy consists of information privacy, communication privacy, territorial privacy, as well as bodily privacy. And we are talking about personal data protection, then we are talking about the information privacy. Next slide. How about the scope of human security? In accordance with the United Nations General Assembly resolution in 2012, human security is deemed as the right of people to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair. And United Nations Development Program introduced a new concept of human security, which equates security with people rather than territories, with development rather than arms. So human security puts its emphasis over people security, which are free from fear, free from want, free from poverty, uphold people's dignity, and free from despair. Next slide, we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals of 2030 that we need to take into account, including in the perspective of personal data protection. Next slide. We are talking now about the new normal in the post-pandemic era. According to the International Bar Association Global Employment Institute, in the new normal, in the post-pandemic area, most of people have a kind of working from home, yeah, or remote working arrangements. And there are some rights belongs to the employee, like the right to disconnect. And of course, there are some data privacy challenges. Next slide. This is about data protection and SDGs achievement. On this issue, we will discuss about the global development of personal data protection, and how about the regional development of PDP in ASEAN, for example. And then what are the relevance, for example, with the SDGs achievement. Next slide. I think it is already mentioned by Mr. Tervel that the EU General Data Protection Regulation is deemed as gold standard, as a game changer regarding personal data protection. But prior to that, actually, personal data protection has been protected through previous instruments, starting from the OECD guidelines in 1980, as amended in 2010. There was also Council of Europe Convention on Personal Data Protection, EC Directive, and within the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, there is a APEC Privacy Framework of 2004 as amended in 2015. Yeah? And of course, EU General Data Protection Regulations, which have been impressively elaborated by Mr. Tervel. And this EU GDPR actually has been used as benchmark by Indonesia when we formulate and deliberate our new law on PDP. Next slide. At the regional level, especially within the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, We knew that there are some instruments like the ASEAN Framework on PDP, ASEAN Framework on Digital Data Governance, and also regarding the transboundary flow of personal data within the ASEAN countries, we knew there is an ASEAN model contractual clauses or MCCs for transboundary flow of personal data. Next slide. At the national level in Indonesia, of course, the urgency and mandate for formulating PDP law is actually based on Article 28G1 of the Indonesian 1945 Constitution as a mandate. And the initiative or the initial initiative to formulate PDP law actually has been started in 2006 by the Ministry of State Apparatus Empowerment and Bureaucratic Reform. But then the academic draft, which has been passed to the Ministry of Communication and Information, was finalized in 2015. And after more than 9 sessions of deliberation within the Parliament, finally, on the 20th of September 2022, this draft law have been approved. Of course, the challenge is not the formulation of the law itself, but how this law must be implemented in effective, efficient, and coherent way. Yeah. Next slide. How about the relevance with the SDGs achievement? Personal data protection as reflection of protection of basic human rights, of course, shall be guaranteed in most of activities, including in cross-border data flow for business, trade, and investment. And the promotion of business, trade, and investment would support the achievement of SDGs, which eventually achieve human security objective. That is the relation or the relevance, yeah, between personal data protection and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide. This is another issue. Yeah. Next slide, please. This is another issue about digitization of health system and personal data protection. We are facing with the issue of state surveillance versus PDP. And there were also some problems regarding the Peduli Lindungi or Care and Protect apps versus PDP, and how the state digitization has its impact toward personal data protection. Next slide, about state surveillance versus PDP. The rise of artificial intelligence technology have led to the proliferation of mass surveillance systems, including face recognition and voice identification for a range of uses. CCTV cameras can be used as a part of a new nationwide surveillance system. Therefore, there is a need to ensure transparency on the utilization of the above technologies by respecting the rights of data subject as elaborated by Turbo and complying with PDP principles as also been elaborated by Mr. Turbo, especially in the EU context. Next slide. Next slide is related to the Peduli Lindungi, yeah, or Care and Protect apps. As we all may realize that the recent data leaks from Peduli Lindungi and now defunct electronic health alert card, or known as EHAC application, have exposed cybersecurity risks to health records in the digital space. As we know that health record is deemed as sensitive data or specific data. In its 2021 Indonesia report on human rights practice in April 2022, The United States Department of State flagged NGOs' concern about what information was gathered by Peduli Lindungi and how it was stored and used by the government of Indonesia, which is deemed as unlawful interference in privacy. So on the one hand, we are talking about protection of privacy, especially information privacy, but on the other hand, Peduli Lindungi application was used to trace, in order to minimize or to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19. So there must be a balance, on the individual rights on the one hand, and also the public interest on the other hand. Next slide is about the state digitization of health and its impact toward PDP. The global pandemic has accelerated digital transformation in healthcare. It was mentioned by Pak Teguh in his keynote speech today. A pressing or top priority for healthcare leaders is to continue to expand care delivery beyond hospital by investing in technologies such as digital health record, telehealth, and artificial intelligence tools that can enhance efficiency, improve care, and connect remote communities. For Indonesia, top investment priorities will be in both AI and telehealth. Digitalization of health will involve the processing of personal data. And health record is sensitive personal data that shall be processed and utilized by taking into account the rights of the data subjects. Next slide is about fake news and digital literacy in the post-pandemic era. We will discuss about the fake news, what is fake news, what is digital literacy, and how to prevent and overcome fake news through digital literacy. Next slide. Fake news as the online publication intentionally or knowingly false statements of fact. Of course, in the world, there were some cases relevant to fake news, like the claim of China virus of COVID-19 by Donald Trump, and also some fake news on vaccine distribution. Some relevant concept of fake news, we see some similarities like content bubbles, for example, misinformation or unintentional opinion, disinformation, intentional fakes or amplifiers. So we are not only talking about misinformation, but we can also talking about disinformation, content bubbles, and all are covered by the term fake news. Next slide. On digital literacy. What is digital literacy? Digital literacy refers to an individual's ability to find, evaluate, and communicate information through typing and other media on various digital platforms. Components of digital literacy are the ability to find and select information, effective communication, e-safety, function skills, creativity, critical thinking and evaluation, cultural and social understanding, and collaboration. So we need, as mentioned by our moderator, we need awareness raising, we need education, for more digital literacy to our society, which is in the post-pandemic society. Next slide. And how to prevent and overcome fake news through digital literacy. Of course, one is digital literacy, but there are also some other ways. For example, by developing ethics in the internet, by formulating code of conduct, by avoid war journalism, for example, by notices and disclaimers, and also by media liability insurance, etc. These are the way, to prevent and overcome fake news through digital literacy. Next slide. And now we turn to the lesson learned and strategies to promote better data protection in supporting SDGs achievement. First, regarding respecting rights of data subject, as mentioned by Tervel. Second, comply with data protection principles, also has been mentioned by Tervel. Third, protecting personal data on cross-border data flow. And fourth, preventing and handling data leakage. We will see it one by one, but not in detail. Yeah. Next slide. When we are talking about respecting rights of data subject, it has already mentioned by Tervel, it consists of rights of access, data portability, rectification, right to object, rights to object to direct marketing. It is in EU GDPR, but not in our new law. Right to erasure, or known as the right to be forgotten, and rights to restriction of processing. Next slide. Next slide is related to the comply with data protection principles. I think it is also already mentioned. I made some observation to the previous draft of our PDP law and compare with the EU GDPR. Most of the data protection principles as formulated in EU GDPR are actually adopted. Yeah. But the only problem is in EU GDPR, all these principles are well elaborated, but not in our new law. In the implementation of these new laws, some problems that we may anticipate is the possibility to interpret and elaborate in a different way. Next slide. And protecting personal data on cross-border data flow. Of course, there are some requirements for data transfer, such as adequate level of protection, providing adequate safeguards, and then by adopting legally binding and enforceable instruments, by using binding corporate rules, by developing standard contractual clauses between, for example, data controllers and data controllers and data processors. And as far as related to the United States, there are also some safe harbor privacy principles and privacy shield principles. Next slide. And how about the preventing and handling of data leakage? Yeah. First, of course, there must be a kind of data breach management policy, which set out the roles and responsibilities involved in managing a data breach and describe the steps and an entity will take it if a data breach occurs. And also, of course, data breach notification when the leakage happen or the data breach happen, such as notify the data subject to the minister or to the supervisory authority in accordance with relevant laws and regulations, and also notification in written concerning the leak of personal data, when and how and what steps has been taken to recover, etc. I think that's all my presentation. I'm trying my best, of course, to answer the questions as formulated in the TOR, but of course, not all can be satisfactorily answered. Hopefully, it can be complemented by other speakers. Thank you very much. And I'm turning it back to Ibu Meta as our moderator.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you so much, Professor Ridot Bagus Supancana. Indeed, that was such a very compact and yet fruitful another course that we have this afternoon from you about the multiple layers of the PDP that we just had, and how or what are the most important and relevant strategies in the future for us. That I noticed, at least one of the highlighted notion from your presentation is about how the implementation or how the regulation itself could actually be potentially perceived in multiple ways, so to speak. So that could be another homework for us, besides so many homeworks in the future that you already thoroughly presented on your presentation. Indeed, we would expect our future generation could pass through this the development of this regulation, because as you and also Tervel already mentioned about the complexity of the PDP or of the data protection, that it always has to be go hand in hand with the technology development. So in regards to that, I would also love to invite again our audience. I've seen almost 100 audience, and now we have 92 participants coming among us. So I would like to again remind to all of the audience to not to hesitate to raise any questions or remarks through the chat box, and don't forget to also mention the name, the institution background, as well as to whom that the question is addressed. So to go forward to the next presentation, which would be the very last presentation of today's discussion, would be coming from Dr. Sih Yuliana Wahyu Ningtyas, SHM Hum, that will be delighted to bring a presentation on the title of Data-Driven Society Post-Pandemic, Up for New Challenge? Question mark. So without a further ado, Dr. Sih Yuliana Wahyu Ningtyas, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Meta. Thank you for Santana and Pak Tervel also for the discussions and presentations. So please allow me to share screen just to make it easier for you to follow what I will talk about. Yeah, so as Ibu Meta has mentioned before, I would like to share with you some thoughts on data-driven society post-pandemic in Indonesia. Are we up for new challenges? So yeah, I hope now you can see the screen and sharing. I hope, yeah, or not yet.
Yes, we can see, May.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, and I would like also to mention that I am happy to see here somebody from TU Leuven, from STIP, Pak Tervel. I was there several years ago, and I'm glad that I can see somebody from the same research center. It was a very happy, productive time there. Say hi to everybody, maybe who still remember. I was there, Professor Pehi Falke in particular. He was a professor I was working with. Yeah, so now I would like to, before I start to talk about Indonesia, I would like to little bit take you to what is going on in ASEAN in terms of the data protection framework, though it has been explained by Professor Pancana also before about the legal framework in ASEAN. So if we look at what is going on in ASEAN, we can see that ASEAN already has a legal framework, although this is more voluntary and non-binding in nature. So it is not the EU GDPR. This is mandatory, that is binding to all European Union member states. In ASEAN, we have what's so-called the ASEAN ways that doesn't allow us to have such power endorsed to ASEAN itself as an organization to have a supranational power above the member states. So the framework is more voluntary and non-binding. So as Professor Panchana has mentioned earlier, we have the ASEAN Framework on Personal Data Protection from 2016 with reference to the AEC Blueprint 2025, AIM 2020, and APEC Privacy Framework 2015, although it also opens for the acceptance, the adoption, the recognition. The recognition is a better term. The recognition of the universally recognized standards to protect data protection. And we have also ASEAN Framework on Digital Data Governance from 2018. And within the ASEAN CBDF mechanism, cross-border data flows mechanism, we have also what's so-called model for contractual clauses, MCCs from 2020, that also adopts the concept of adequacy protection level. And then we are developing the certification for cross-border data flows. From ASEAN at glance, we are now looking at the map of the ASEAN member states, and here we can see different colors. This is not really precise, this map, but it's more a general map just to show you a little bit about what is going on in individual countries in ASEAN. So we can have the three categories of the ASEAN member states in terms of the data protection regulation framework. First, with the how we call it, this brownish, a little bit oranges color, the countries with general application of data protection regulation. We have Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia. I'm sorry, the colors are a bit mixed up here, but please look at the notes here. Indonesia just recently passed the Data Protection Act on 20 September of 2022, which is a great news for us in Indonesia, but then we will have further discussion on that. And then we have also countries with sector-specific regulation, such as Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And then the third category is countries with no specific law governing data protection, such as Brunei, Darussalam, Myanmar, and Myanmar. So that's how it looks like at a glance in ASEAN and ASEAN member states. And with what I said before about the good news about the new Data Protection Act in Indonesia, let's go to Indonesia. I'm sorry, I think my screen is frozen. Oh, no, thank you, not. So what happens in Indonesia? What kind of challenges that we have in Indonesia? As Professor Supancana also earlier mentioned about the TOR, I also tried my best to respond to the TOR, and it's a very broad themes that that are brought within the TOR. So I hope that I could cover all the points that that are addressed in the TOR. The first point that I would like to mention is about data intensive regulation versus civic space. What is going on here, well, in the society now is all about data. All about data. We are talking about data. Everybody wants to have data, any kind of data. Well, maybe we don't really realize, but we often, as individuals, also want to have data, more data, and so on. And then this is all about data, and as we go to the data-driven economic, data-driven market, we understand the role of data, the even more increasing role of data, for instance, in the process of refining what kind of services that you can provide to your consumers, to your customers, when you have more data about them. So you can have this customized services for them, and hopefully you can serve them better. That is the positive side, but there are also negative aspects of it, as we already discussed before with the first and the second speakers. And what is the problem here? The problem is that we live in a kind of a wild world in terms of the use of data. Why wild world? Because everybody, every entity can ask for data, and then we don't have a clear guidance on what to do and what not. As mentioned before, we have the new DPA, sorry, the Data Protection Act, but it is a new act, and I will discuss later on about what kind of problem that we still have on the way forward. And data is needed, but then we don't have clear boundaries about how to collect, to use data. That is the problem, and that we try to tackle with a new regulation. And then not only all about data, but also all about apps. Everybody is now crazy about having apps, developing apps, and also ministry, institution. Everybody wants to create new apps, and everybody wants everybody to use apps. But then we have these risks of abuses, because we don't have a clear rule about how to process data within those apps. We do have regulations before, separated regulations, but then now we have the comprehensive regulation, but this is new. So this is something that is that we still need to find out how it will be implemented. And then we have also, even within the new Data Protection Act, this general protection, but with indefinite exception, such as if we use the term public interest, what does it mean, this public interest? Then we have national security. What you mean with national security? In which situation then you can waive, you can exempt the application of the Act of the General Protection for Data for personal data when it comes to the issue of national security and public interest, for instance. And then we have also issues with compliance post Data Protection Act. Sorry, this is a typo here. This is the question about enforcement. The problem is first the readiness, how ready we are in tackling this compliance aspect of this new TPA. We're not talking about big data controllers, for instance, global companies who are already familiar, for instance, with the European General Data Protection Regulation, and also familiar with the obligations of the data controllers in terms of data protection. We are talking about, as mentioned earlier, also about university. What about university? Do we have to comply with that? Do we even have privacy policy? This is also something that we still need to deal with. And then we have the problem of awareness. Not now we are aware of the importance of data. We are not aware that my personal data, our personal data deserves protection. I, as a data subject, deserves a protection, or better, I am entitled to protection. But awareness is not stopping there. We also need to be aware of how to do this. And also this awareness on the part of the data controllers, data processors, and so on. And then we have also issue about effective enforcement. If I am not, if I have a problem, if I have a legal case about data protection, my personal data, my right has been violated, what should I do? Where should I go? Do I have to go first to the data controller? Can I go directly to court? Do I have to go to police first? Do I have to find a legal support lawyer? What should I do? This is still something that is not really clear even after the enactment of the TPA. And the second part is about the digital-based services against and the discrimination issue against vulnerable groups. So we have issues about digitalization and inclusivity. On one hand, we are very happy that we are going to a digital era. Everything seems modern now, practical. Life is easier somehow, but there is also an issue about what about those who cannot access this digital world for some reason. Those who cannot use apps to, say, book train tickets. Those who cannot have a digital management model or a platform, but they need the services. So this is something that we have not, or at least we have not sufficiently discussed. What about this right? What about those people who live in a remote area, who don't even have internet, but now we have in Jakarta this euphoria about everything is digital. So there is this gap that we need to fill in correctly. And also this limitation, the limitation of freedom and choice issue, for instance, when it relates to the next point that I'd like to point out about the use of the algorithmic decision making and how we would address this. For instance, for profiling and also for other types of usages. And this is not only for private sectors, this issue is addressed to, yeah, but also to public entities or public institutions. And then about misinformation and literacy, as I mentioned before, we have an issue with this tech euphoria. But somehow we have also the data protection euphoria. Like everybody's talking about it, but not really understand about it. And this can come to a confusion. And then some people also try to take benefit from this confusion. We have regulatory issues I would discuss in a bit later. Lacking of awareness, I also have mentioned before, and then this issue with the evil is in the detail. Sometimes we don't really understand how it works within the platform. When we are talking about the use of data, the control of data, how to secure the data within a certain platform. And then we don't really understand the details about how these issues are covered within the Data Protection Act if we talk about Indonesia. And this is also a gap that we need to fill in. And it comes as, and then we come to the next point that we need to build literacy, as Professor Supanchana has discussed before about digital literacy. Not only that people are good at using digital technology apps and so on, but understand also how this usage will impact or affect other people. What are the consequences? What are the legal consequences? And if people are willing to take those consequences when they use the technology. And on the other side of the pendulum is transparency. We are also in a need of transparency on the part of the, for instance, data controllers. Sometimes data controllers have sufficiently comply with the principles of data protection, but to some extent, but it lacks one principle, compliance to one principle, that is transparency, which means that now users, data subjects cannot really understand or cannot understand what is going on, what is done by these data controllers. So the understanding that transparency is needed is also needed. And this is, again, another challenge in this aspect. The last point I'd like to address is strategies for better data protection. If we talk about SDG 16, then we talk about promoting justice, peaceful, inclusive societies. And as I mentioned earlier about inclusivity, this is still an issue. Right now, recently, we are talking about economic inclusivity with the use of the digital technology. So it should be good for the economics, but then we still have issues, as I already discussed earlier. With the new Data Protection Act, we are doing our best to respond to the need for a better data protection, but there is something lacking. So although we have the law on now already, but unfortunately we still do not have the Data Protection Supervisory Authority yet. So the law mandates the president to establish this institution, this unit, this authority, and what kind of institution it will be. It is still a big question mark. And we, of course, well, no, it's not of course, we, because there are different opinions on this, but in my opinion, it will be really, really important to have an independent data protection supervisory authority. And if we want to learn a little bit from the lesson from the EU GDPR, then we can understand that this independency is really, really important. And also earlier, Darfur mentioned about one of the functions of the Data Protection Supervisory Authority that is not there in the list of the function of the DP, this institution, this authority in the law. Yeah, the authority is not there yet, but the function is already listed in the law. And this function is for consultation. If data controllers, processors, they want to consult with the Data Protection Supervisory Authority, there should be that mechanism. So they will be supported, helped to comply instead of just being judged whether they are complying or not, especially since this is something relatively new for Indonesia. So the way forward, we have a list of homework. We need to define better the exemptions for the exemption for the applicability of the law, the new law, and also the Data Protection Authority. And then also we need to clarify the procedures and sanctions, because this is something that something interesting is that within the new DPA, we have also the criminal sanctions for data protection violation. This is for illegitimate use, collection, processing or use of data, among others, and also for data fraud. And then also we need to support to build readiness of stakeholders for compliance. I'm sorry, I have my cat on the table, so I'm a bit distracted. And then and also we need supports for data controllers and data subjects, both sides, for data controllers to comply with the law, and data subject for them to know how to exercise their rights. And there is also need for special protection for children and other vulnerable groups, because this is not there yet in the law. And then we have also to tackle the problem about legitimate access, the compliance again, consent. It was already mentioned earlier, but I want to mention specifically about consent of children. It's not there yet. And also to avoid denial of services for those who have legitimate rights to access certain services. For instance, just because they cannot agree on the unfair terms of privacy policy, then they are denied from getting services or obtaining services. This is something that we need to address carefully. So with that, I would like to end my presentation, and back to you, Ibu Meta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sih Yuliana. That was a very eye-opening presentation, and a lot of information we gather from your presentation, especially the fact that there are abundant, overwhelming number of homeworks in regards to the fact that there are so many people that has not yet been assigned in regards to the implementation of the new PDA regulations about whom to handle which role. Because then we know also from the previous two presentations that there are so many roles and layers on the implementation of these regulations, but we don't have yet the clear derivation of the regulations in order to assign whom should be able to handle which role, including also probably from your presentation. I also have the notes about, for example, the training, because then being or having the body of the government officers itself, I'm pretty sure there should be in future more and more trainings about the implementation of the new regulations, as well as not only for the government officials, but also for the private officials and the non-government societies as well. But in regards to that, of course, I would like to again invite our distinguished audience to raise the questions or remarks, again, in the chat box, you can write down the question immediately together with your name, your institution, as well as to whom that the question is addressed. Nevertheless, I would right away jump on to the first question that I have already seen in the chat box, which was raised by Mas Chandra. The question was about personal data controllers, that they are obligated to protect the personal data from the unauthorized processing. But then what is meant by unauthorized processing? Maybe then this question could probably be answered by two of our speakers, either Professor Supanjana or Dr. Juliana. So maybe starting from Professor Supanjana, do you mind to then respond to this question about unauthorized processing definition from the role of a personal data controller? Thank you. The stage
Thank
is
you
yours.
very much, Ibu Meta. This is really a very practical questions and very important question raised by Pak Chandra. Yeah. What is actually the unauthorized processing? One thing that we should take into consideration that unauthorized processing is, the first thing is without consent or if there is no consent from the data subject, then it is an unauthorized processing. But in other situations, for example, if the data controller process the data beyond its authority, meaning that the data controller collect and process the data more than the data required, which actually required. For example, the data controller is an insurance company, or a data controller is a bank. If a bank, for example, would like to collect and process data of potential bank customer for the possibility to give a loan, for example, then only data which is relevant to be used as consideration to provide loan shall be collected and processed, not other data irrelevant. So this is, if the data collected are irrelevant, then it can be deemed as unauthorized processing. There are a lot of examples, but this is just some practical examples. And this also related to some principles like data minimization, data minimized by design and by default, something like that. Yeah. That's my answer to the first question by Pak Chandra. Thank you, moderator. I turn it to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Bagus Supancana. Dr. Juliana, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Meta. I agree with Prof. Supancana. So just an emphasis. Yeah. We have a list of principles of how to protect data, personal data, and as Prof. Supancana has discussed before, when these principles are not met, or if there is one principle not being satisfied, then this collection of data is illegitimate. For example, just to add another example, is about consent. Data processing is not legitimate when it is not based on the consent of the data subject. And with consent, it is meant to be a substantial consent, not just, yeah, you take it or leave it, you have clicked this and you certainly are okay with it. So the consent, it has to be a well-informed consent, meaning that to allow the data subject to give consent, there has to be an information, sufficient, complete information about why this data is needed, and to what extent, and until when the data will be kept, and how this data will be processed, and so on. This is what I meant before with the principle of transparency. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Gumeta.
Thank you so much, Dr. C. I also acknowledge this point in regards to one thing you mentioned on your presentation about that society or citizens also should be educated about the monitoring and the reports mechanisms of the cyber crime, even though also as mentioned also in the presentation about that the US government already reminded us about the Peduli Lindungi information storage that is now we all know that it's being leaked, and I've also heard from the social media about the reports from people who have experienced cybercrime, apparently also allegedly due to the leak of the Peduli Lindungi data information, but then people somehow still do not know to whom that they can make the report. So there's a very interesting subject to discuss further in the future. So thank you so much as well for the comprehensive answer. So allow me to also go through the next question, which was coming from Sonia. Thank you so much for raising the questions. So there are 3 questions raised by Sonia that will be responded by, again, 2 of our speakers probably. The first question was about the consents. I think this is also a bit similar with the previous questions. And the second question would be about who will be prosecuted for allegedly providing customer personal data without the consent, the bank or insurance, in the on the context of the case of data protection absence on the bank or financial business. And then the third question would be, can this PDP law protect consumers from telemarketing that offers insurance products repeatedly via telephone, which I think most of us also experience this this telemarketing for many years already. So this is very interesting questions indeed, and probably Dr. Sihyuliana, would you begin to then respond to the second and third question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Meta, and thank you for the question. So, yeah, well, there are 3 questions and all related. If a data subject, if an individual, well, in the context of the new TPA, yeah, if one individual is being violated of it concerns the use of the processing of personal data, yeah, so there is a violation, where to report. So this is if it go to the new act, we have 3 channels in terms of procedures in enforcing the law. The first is in Article 12, mentioning about the possibility to submit a private claim, but it is not further elaborated where to, which court. Maybe it's the district court, but this is not mentioned. It will be further regulated by the government regulation. The second, it reminds us of the regulation under the IT law 2008 amended in 2016. The second channel is by using the administrative procedures. So this should be the role that is played, will be played by the data protection supervisory authority that is still on its way to be born. So we still don't have it. But when we have it, hopefully we will have it, the independent one, and we will have it soon. And then we can report, this individual can report to the Data Protection Supervisory Authority. That's the idea. And then there is a third channel. This is the criminal procedure. Under this criminal procedure, there is a list of sanctions if, say, data processors, data controllers violate the law. And but as I mentioned, it applies only to several cases. For instance, the processing of the collection of data that is illegitimate. So if we want to interpret it as well as broad as we want or can, then it can fall under the all the three. So there are channels actually that we can take to exercise the right. And under the criminal sanctions, then it will go through the criminal procedures as usual, criminal well, as common criminal procedure. Well, but on this, I would like to note that we really need this Data Protection Supervisory Authority soon. Why? Because it will help us to avoid complicacy if we want to get through the other two channels. Yeah, that is why we want this authority, because we want to have a quick procedure. We want to have a quick solution. And then the next question is about who will be prosecuted for providing customer personal data without consent, the consent of the customers. Yeah, well, it depends on the case. The key is who is the data controller, who is controlling the data, and who is providing the data to the third party. And if it's the bank, or if it is the insurance, then they individually will be responsible for that. Yeah. If this is done by another third party, illegitimate third party, for example, you outsource this task to a data processor, then there also another responsibility, a liability, and the question is why the data controller allow that kind of data provision by the data processor to the third party. And if the data processor in fact actually violates the contract with the data controller, then there is another case here. So it really depends on the case. Protecting from telemarketing in general, yes, under condition. So basically you need consent every time. And if for this telemarketing you are not you don't provide consent, but still you get these calls, and there is a violation here. Yeah, problem. Sometimes they put this notification somewhere you barely can notice because it's too small, somewhere far below. And then the data controller argues they have already notified you with this information when asking for your consent, but you consented anyway. So if we have this data supervisory authority, then we can counter argue that there is no substantial consent, that there is that the principle of transparency is not satisfactorily met just because it is put there in small font far below the screen. So I hope that would answer the question. But as I said, it's a point of well, okay, we have still quite a little bit long road until we can get there. Thank you. Back to you, Ibu Meta.
Thank you so much, Dr. C. Juliana. That's such an enlightening and educating as well answers from you, that now at least we know that there are at least 3 channels or sorts of like 3 umbrellas of the regulation that alternatively we can always rely on to in regards to reporting any allegedly cybercrime. That's indeed very important information for us, especially not only amidst all the ongoing issues of the leaked data from many of the governmental platforms that has been misused by the criminals, but also the fact that, like for example, the ongoing issue of how our data is also misused by the political parties in regards to the upcoming elections, that some of us do not realize that we are registered without consent to probably some political parties. So I think yeah, your information is very important for us to be aware of. That's indeed there are alternative regulation umbrellas for us to report any allegedly crime. So thank you so much. Again, I would like to give honor to 3 of our distinguished speakers, in addition to the keynote as well as the opening remarks speech today. And it was such a wonderful collaboration again from the Unika Atmajaya Jakarta, Hello Indonesia, and indeed Nuffic Neso Indonesia to have this event. And for the very last part of our discussion today, allow me to present our appreciation upon all of the speakers today, which, yes, would be presented in such digitalized version of certificate as well. The first is the appreciation to Bapak Teguh Arifiadi as the representative from the Kemenkominfo. And then the second would be the appreciation for Mr. Tersel Bobev all the way from Utrecht as one of the speakers, and then also to Dr. Juliana Wahyudningtyas as well. And for the very last part, indeed, to Professor Ida Bagus Supanjana for such a delightful presentation. Again, on behalf of Nuffic Neso Indonesia, I would like to allow me to give appreciation not only to all of the distinguished speakers, but also to all of the audience that have been participated for our today's discussion. Hopefully would not be the last discussion in regards to all the dynamic issues or dynamic topics in regards to the very freshly baked regulation in our country. So I look forward for the next discussion, and don't forget to stay tuned on every information from the Nuffic Neso Indonesia on the upcoming events, especially on the Orange Talk series discussion. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful and fruitful day. And I wish you good luck, and see you on the next Orange Talk series. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And for all the audience, I would like to kindly ask you to fill in the following link for the registration form for the certificate. Yes, so only for the audience who would like to have certificate for the attendance. Kindly just follow the link on the chat box button. Yes. Thank you so much for everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful
Thank you.
day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.